Hi everyone, welcome back to another Introverted Indies interview. I'm Lucy A. McLaren, and alongside my fellow indie author Lydia Baker, I run Introverted Indies as a platform to chat with fellow indie authors who are also fellow introverts, because we know how difficult it can be as introverts and indie authors talking about your books. So today I'm joined by Amena Jamali. So Amena, I'm going to hand right over to you just to briefly introduce yourself.
So, hi Lucy, my name is Amena Jamali, and I am an indie author from Texas, United States, and I write epic fantasy. I have 6 books published under my own name, and I'm looking forward to writing more.
Yeah, you have. So you got your Lord of Freedom series, right? So when you say 6 books,
The 6 books I have is two in the main series, then a prequel. And then the prequel has a Spanish translation. Kind of still debating whether the other books will be getting one, depending on how successful the translation is, and whether my translator would like to continue. And then I also have an anniversary edition of Book One and Book 1.5.
yeah, amazing. Okay, so what can you tell us about your series then? So I know it's Noble Bright, right? It's the 3 books: The Bell Tolling, Reverence Chosen, and The Way It Will Become, which is the prequel. What was the inspiration behind this series?
So the inspiration behind the series is a lot of things. I have been kind of writing it on and off since I was about 10 years old. So it's grown and changed quite a bit as I've been writing it, grown and changed alongside me. It started out as kind of your classic epic fantasy series of girl needs to save the world. And it grew to become something that encompassed a sort of treatise on leadership, character, ethics, eventually politics, and then in this day and age, it's also sort of a way that I address the struggles and difficulties that I myself am facing, that the world is facing. It's the sort of series where you read it because you know the world is on fire and you want to see that the fire can be resolved, that there can be light after the darkness. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the like a sense of inspiration behind it.
So it's got a huge amount of themes, like you said, and you've been writing it since you were 10. So when you started writing it, obviously at 10 years old, did you have this idea of how big it would be? Because each individual book is quite chunky, isn't it? So it's a big series. Did you have a plan of like, okay, this is going to be X amount of books, or is it just something that you felt drawn to writing and didn't really know?
I think it's kind of both. So at 10 years old, much like I am now, I was very ambitious. So I definitely knew they were going to be long books. And I think it's like actually when I got into indie publishing did I realize that long books are not usually the norm. I always knew that they were going to be long. And I wanted them to be developed enough to sustain that length. The books I most admired at 10 years old as a child were really long 500, 600, 700, 800 page books. So like one of my uh, model series was Aragon, and the Aragon books are pretty big. To use the word, they're really the definition of chunky. So I always knew that was what I was aspiring towards. And then as I was constructing these series in my teens and my and during college, I knew that it would be expansive. Like I knew that it wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be just one storyline, that there would be multiple subplots, additional threads weaving around the main plot. I knew all of that. But also in some ways I think that it was only when I started writing book one and started publishing book one did I realize, okay, this is going to have prequels to it, this is going to have um, these 1.5, 2.5 kind of books to it, this is going to become really really big.
Yeah, because it's multi perspective as well. It's multiple characters, so it's there's a lot to weave together. You've got obviously the 2 books in the main series and the prequel, and is that finished as it is, or are there more books that you plan to
there
write within that world?
there are definitely more books.
Mm-hmm.
So the original plan I had even at the beginning of book one, was that it would be a 7-book series. It's you can kind of already see that there is a plan here, because this is one of my favorite parts, that the covers, they do connect. So
I do. It's amazing.
yeah. So the full image is meant to eventually be 7 books. So based on the amount of just horrible things that there are to resolve, it really is a story that requires 7 books to get all the way to the ending, when the great evil is defeated and the heroes have won. In addition, every book, based on what I kind of was laid down as my rules when I was writing book one, will have a 1.5 to it, or like, like a 0.5 to it. So that's kind of what I'm in the middle of trying to get together to publish. So book 2.5. And then what also, and this is the kind of the part that I was saying, that I didn't realize I was going to do this until I was actually in the middle of starting it, is that I'm also going to publish more prequels. So there's definitely more stories to tell about the heroes' parents, about the events in the world that brought them to the point that they actually have to fight this great evil in the first place.
Yeah, so it's obviously something that's, the more you've written it, the more it's become apparent how much there is to tell of the world and the characters, which is great. It's very exciting as an author, isn't it, to have that kind of broad world building and characters that you want to tell more of their history. And I must say, I've read the bell tolling, and your writing is beautiful. I really love it. It's very I think poetic is a good word to use. Because I normally don't read like noble writing. I'd read darker stuff. I like how you said about, it's with the world being on fire. It's nice to have a book where actually the bad guys are going to get their comeuppance in the end, right? And that's where you're aiming for.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So you self-published this series. So was that always your plan, or did you think about traditional publishing? Like, what was your thinking around that?
So, book one was in fact hybrid published, since impetus to even think about self-publishing is that, prior to starting like the draft that became final, is I started reading a lot of indie authors in around 2019. And that's when I realized that that world even existed. Before that point, I had really no idea. I just truly did not know that the world existed. Um, it in part due to my reliance on library books, on books that could be found in half price. I just didn't know. But the path that I took was a little bit more complicated, because I originally, when I was putting this together, you could term it a lack of confidence, that I didn't know if I could actually do it, and I needed someone to say, oh yes, you can do it. I say that the path was more complicated because things didn't end well with the hybrid publisher. They soured somewhere in the middle, and they were very sour by the end. So that is why I ultimately republished The Bell Tolling. Since I still retain the rights, I republished it as a second edition. So that's the one that more fully matches book two. And then during that process, that was when I became even more aware of what it took to indie publish, and I decided this is definitely the only path I want to follow for anything that is fantasy, especially anything in this series and in related series. That isn't to say that trad publishing is bad. My one non-fantasy book in cybersecurity is trad published. It's just that as far as indie publishing goes, with like I even realized with the hybrid publisher, with the length of the book, the scope, the themes, the characters, me as a person, it's the only place for me to go is really indie publishing. The only place to retain creative control throughout the whole process.
Yeah, that's true. And if you've got like this very specific vision of what you want your series to be, right? And it sounds like you have, even down to the cover and how you've planned that out. It seems like it's the right path for you. So how have you found the indie publishing path? Because I've heard from a lot of authors, and doing it myself, it can be a bit of a steep learning curve, right?
So that is where I think that the hybrid publisher, despite what eventually happened between us, that's where they have really been an advantage, because they taught me a few of those things that I haven't had to learn from scratch. Otherwise, I mean, like, as the other authors and you yourself know, I mean, it's a very difficult journey. It's very difficult to keep marketing, to keep on top of it. To like, if you don't keep going, no one's going to pick up your tasks for you. So the the business side, not the easiest part. At the same time, I would not give it up for anything because there's still the reality that the creative control, like I know that my books are wholly mine. There is not a single word that goes into the final published versions that I didn't want to be there. um
Hmm.
and there is a kind of thrill in getting to put the book together and like um putting together the editing, putting together the formatting, the cover, and I do enjoy that. So it's a it's a complicated space. It's sort of like so in my day job, I'm a consultant. So I'm a
Hmm.
consultant who works for a company. So um it's it's a bit like that you have to be on top of your accounting, your building relationships, your paperwork, your organization, and there is a thrill of entrepreneurship in that. So it's a mixed bag. There are disadvantages, there are struggles, but in my opinion, the advantages and the benefits do outweigh everything else.
Mm. Yeah, I'd say that's the main thing, isn't it? You ultimately you're getting what you want out of it, which is
Mm-hmm.
seeing your books how you want them to be. And I must ask with the cover, so because obviously you've got those first two and they connect together. So the plan is for all seven to have that kind of link, which is amazing. Like, so how did you have a vision in your mind as to what you wanted the covers to look like quite early on?
So while editing the bell tolling in 2021, one of my thoughts was how do I make sure the cover suits the book. It's kind of fitting that some of the more critical feedback I receive is that this is not on trend. I didn't want it to really be on trend. I wanted it to suit the book. In my opinion, like the kind of based on what happens in the book, it got to suit the book. So
Hmm.
I had this idea one night that the the most appropriate thing I could do is to depict my character's relationship on the cover.
Hmm.
And that is that they all connect together. That they are getting a little bit into my characters themselves. They often describe each other as five parts of one soul. It's sort of like the idea of platonic soulmates, but with five people instead of two. So since they connect together in this way, it made sense that their images on the cover would connect in this way. And I'd seen books that had matching covers. There is one duology out there that has the picture of one person on top of two covers. Um,
Yeah.
I've seen at least one other example since. But I decided that, hey, I have five heroes, seven books. I'm going to somehow make it connect across seven covers. And my best friend and artist, they were on board. They said, okay, we will try. It seems like a really interesting challenge, and they have kind of borne up with me in the years since on making sure they really do exactly align. And we have that planned continuing in the background that they are working on the art slowly because it requires quite a bit of detail and precision. And very slowly, we will end up piecing together the next five books.
Yeah. Oh, that's gonna be so like a lot of fun seeing those coming together, being able to connect them all. So how do you find writing a multi-perspective series? Because it's complicated, right? It's like you're trying to manage multiple characters, multiple storylines, and how they connect and weave together. What's your favorite part of it? Least favorite part of it?
It's a it's a whole thing. You know, you write multi perspective stories too. So I have a structure. So just how I am, I like structure for things. So my characters usually, for the first three quarters of the book, all but one have three chapters each. The main hero has a varying number of chapters, and then on the final quarter, it is that they all have one chapter, one after each other, and that pattern repeats three times. So that's how the structure is arranged, and I arrange my plot and my plot events around that structure. So that makes it a little bit easier because I'm not debating with every scene and with every chapter. Hey, who do I write now? I know, okay, if I'm writing chapter 30s from this perspective, so the next two are also going
Yeah.
to be from this one. So then there's the actual writing of it. The method I've developed is that each character has a particular combination of an actual physical song and a
Mm-hmm.
sort of vibe and headspace. Like the two fit together in my head. So I know that, for example, Arista, one of my characters, the one that's on the second half,
Mm-hmm.
she is on at the surface, to borrow the words of a reader, sort of a jock. She's very bold, very outgoing, the sort of person who makes a lot of kind of sassy jokes. Um, Beneath that, she's someone who and these are terms that I started using after I wrote the first book. She's most likely neurodivergent. She's struggling with the fact that she's left her family behind. In order to escape their situation, they sent her out into the world and they covered her escape. So she's struggling with that grief. She is very determined to accomplish her purpose as part of the group. She is very focused on the ability of self-defense, giving someone confidence in life. She's someone who's overcoming a lot of fear. Her title is that she's the exemplar of bravery, so it ties into that she's someone who
Yeah.
goes through the challenges of what it means to be brave. So she has a particular sound, so to speak, in my head, and that sound is sort of evolving as the series progresses. And so if I want to write, I have to clear my mind of everything but her sound. And then when I have that, and I like refreshed my memory as to like her particular mannerisms, her way of speaking, her way of thinking, then I can write. So it takes kind of quite a bit of prep
Mm.
work. All of this has really firmly made me a plotter because I have to be able to, move around the structure and also prep for each character. And then the second part of it, in my opinion, one of the difficulties of multiple perspectives is not losing track of where your characters are, and also keeping in mind that they're developing and doing things and forming relationships outside whoever's turn it is to speak. So that's also another reason that I'm more of a plotter now than I was when I began, because I I keep it in my mind that, hey, it's Lucian's turn to speak. It's Kyrus's turn to speak. Arista's not even there, but she's forming a new friendship. She's getting closer to this other woman who she's starting to regard as a sister, and when it's her turn to speak again, that particular person is going to play an even bigger role than she was when they were all in the background. So it's kind of keeping those details straight and just continually having to refresh myself on previous chapters as I go. This also makes me a major self-editing sort because I use what's already written to shape what's about to be written.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when you say that about holding in your mind what's happening for the background characters when you're in a certain viewpoint. Because I'd never thought of that, but it's so true, isn't it? Because they don't just stand still; they're not frozen in time whilst you're in a certain POV. It's all of it has to move together, and you have to kind of keep all the cogs turning, so to speak. So yeah, that sounds like actually you have a really structured way of doing it. Actually, literally get yourself into the specific headspace for each character. And when you say song, is it like literally you'll play a certain song for each character to get yourself in the headspace?
Yes, it's not always the same song, but there's a particular like list of songs. It is religious music, so
Mm-hmm.
there's religious music with a certain like theme to it. So there was a point that whatever I would play with Arista had like this um, kind of this feel for desire, faith kind of desire, very much, and I wish that I could fulfill my wishes. And now there's more of a active sound to that music, the music I'm picking. So it's kind of that together. It's also kind of like my mindset when I write. It's all these pieces that make it repeatable to switch perspectives in the way I do. And but at the same time, I should add that there are definitely perspectives that come harder. So I mentioned
Mm.
Arista because she's the one I'm currently writing, but her perspective is definitely harder than Elian or Lucian.
Hmm.
They tend to come much easier.
Why do you think that is? Is it because of the type of like character they are, or?
I think so. It's hard for me to say because I think in personality I might actually be more like Arista. So it's I guess maybe me sorting out what's me and what's them. And for those who are not all that different but somewhat different, I can put
Mm.
aside my own reactions and mannerisms and more easily shift to theirs. And the ones who are very different from me, like Kairos, it requires quite a bit more work to shift in.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense because they're all unique characters with unique personalities, and sometimes you're gonna have to be more mindful of, is this me or is this the character? Whereas some characters, like you said, are so completely different to you that that's just not ever going to be a possibility. There's not going to be any kind of crossover between them. It's a lot to manage, is fair to say, basically. And as I think I would say, and I'm sure you would agree with this, because your series is going to be far bigger than mine. As you go on in the series, it's a lot more to hold, isn't it? To be aware of in terms of where they are in certain points of the plot of the story. And you said actually you have to be a plotter because of the amount of characters and the way that you're writing it. So is that the case? You've got like the whole series kind of plotted out for yourself. You've got that structure written down.
I do, especially at a high level. I would also say that mentally I plot rather frequently. I wouldn't say all the time, but rather frequently I'm thinking, okay, so this happened in this book, but this needs to happen in the next book. And if I think it's the kind of point that absolutely has to be written down, I do write it down as well. That especially is true for side characters. I didn't mention that, like, that's also something to manage. I do my very best to make those side characters real people as well, and
Yeah.
the 1.5, 2.5 books help because a lot of the side characters have perspectives there, so it's like you said, it's a lot to manage. One of my perpetual author worries is that I will forget some really important detail and write myself into a corner. So I'm trying to refresh myself on my own books pretty frequently.
Yeah, I think it's necessary, isn't it? Because there's only so much you can hold in your
Yeah,
brain. So you have
yeah.
to have something written down, all this information, so you can revisit it. Um, so when you say those 1.5, 2.5, because you mentioned that's a plan to have those in between, is that like kind of shorter stories? Like you said, different perspectives come into it. Is it fleshing out the world of the series?
Yeah, it's kind of like fleshing out the world. So when I wrote The Bell Tolling, I did a lot of work from writing from the other perspectives, and then I decided to take that and build upon it and turn it into its own book because I realized it couldn't go into the main series. Like, five perspectives is stretching what a book can be. Um, I had a lot more as part of my side material, so that's how the 1.5 came about. And it's the 1.5 book, The Resonant Bell, is really the very first book that I published fully by myself. Um, so that's what I'm working on now, The Gifted Reverence.
Hmm.
So the idea is that they capture the other perspectives. So my main character Lucian, he has a brother, Darian. He has certain insights about his brother, about the other heroes that are really interesting to write and to read. So there are chapters for that. There is a particular side character who is Elian's aide, Elasir. He has some interesting insights. There are some really fascinating character journey things that he goes through in book 2. So he has
Hmm.
perspectives around that. One really important character who shows up in book 1, Tahira, some has some particular things to offer about the events of the main series. And then a lot of these characters experience the same event but through slightly different lenses. So their viewpoints are all captured in these books. And then the final piece is that I have characters who are going to be introduced in books 3, 4. Haven't yet written the ones for book 5, but 3 and 4 definitely. Characters that someday are going to show up, But one of the things I wanted to do with the series is to show that, okay, the main heroes are going through something, but there are other things happening in the world at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The movements they make, the change that they make, it involves a lot of people. It's not just them. Kind of working around the theory that leadership is just about one person doing things. It's that one person definitely directing things, but great events, great happenings, great leaders, they have a lot of people behind them. And so these are some of those people who are shaping events in other parts of the world. They themselves are preparing the way for the main heroes. They're also really essential. So book 1.5 starts some of that off, that there are these characters elsewhere who are, in fact, if it wasn't for the fact that my main heroes would eventually show up, they would be the stars of their own story.
Yeah, so it's the characters that you wouldn't usually meet in like an epic fantasy series that, they're not the chosen ones, but actually what they're doing is paving the way for those main characters. So if they hadn't done that, then the story wouldn't play out as it does. It gives a really interesting insight into things going on outside the kind of the main storyline. It sounds like it's, like you said, it's a lot of fun to write and it's very interesting. And the more you write it, the more you're understanding your world, and the more satisfying it is then to reach the final book as and when you do that. So did you always want to write fantasy, would you say? Because you mentioned obviously Aragon being a big inspiration. So was it always the case that fantasy was where you were going to go when you started writing?
Pretty much. I don't think it ever really occurred to me to ever write anything else. Always classic epic fantasy with a slightly medieval-esque setting with swords and arrows. It was always kind of that, and magic. Um, that's like the bulk of what I read when I was really starting to read, when I was like 7, 8, 9, 10, and it is the bulk of what I enjoy reading, even if I do read more of the romantasy books as well now. But it was always going to be this, and it always was going to be more towards epic fantasy than towards a romantasy kind of work.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Because it sounds as though it's the same as it was for me. Like I was reading fantasy, and then you'd start writing, it just naturally happens. You just enjoy writing what you enjoy reading ultimately. So, because you said you started working on this when you were 10, have you like dabbled in any other stories, or has this been the main focus?
I did have some other stories when I was around 10 years old. They were basically the same in style and tone as this, same in plot. It was, again, the series, stories of like some chosen one who ends up saving the world. They were very similar. So I think that by the time I was about 14, they basically got absorbed into this main series. Now I do have other stories planned. There is like some books I would like to set in the world before the Lord of Freedom and the events that lead up to it. Some like fairy tale retellings, because I really do enjoy reading those. There is a more of an urban fantasy like story that I would like to set in the real world. The plot premise is basically the words cyberfae. So kind of combining cybersecurity and fantasy, like my day job side and my passion into one thing. So now I have those stories. But for a very long time, it was just the Lord of Freedom. And that and the related series occurring in the world of Basilia.
Yeah, and I mean, that's great that it's something that's been building in your mind for such a long time, and that you've stuck with as well. This is obviously something that you've really focused on, and you've kept revisiting and building upon. I was going to say, have you always wanted to be a writer? But it sounds like as soon as you started reading and getting into books, that was when that spark was lit.
I wouldn't quite say that. I think that originally it was some kind of art, some kind of science. It turned into being an author when I was 10 years old, but for various reasons, people, disabuse me of the notion that writing can actually make money for most people. And when I was about 14, I decided that whatever I was going to do was going to be in politics, in national security specifically, and I was going to do research that would change the world. For reasons that didn't work out, namely the political situation in the United States when I was 19 years old, in 2016, the things that changed then, that path, I couldn't find a way to get there. But even if I had, that path is not open to a person like me. And also many of the resources that I needed at the time, it didn't exist. It didn't exist then. They exist now, but they definitely didn't exist when I needed them. So that's why, basically, midway in college, although I was pursuing my political philosophy degree, I decided to go into cybersecurity. I know a lot of authors talk about their day job as, something that basically just pays the bills and that's it. I've put enough work into it to actually be ambitious about cybersecurity, to want to do something meaningful in this field. Since that instinct that put me towards politics in the first place, protecting my nation, protecting the people around me, that instinct is still there. My books are definitely full of it. So I do want to continue in that path. But what I realized, during the pandemic is you don't have to just have one path. The real world is definitely more complex than our fantasy worlds in the way that you can walk more than one path at the same time. You can be a small business owner and also work in the corporate space. You can do multiple things. And so these are my two main paths. That I work in cybersecurity. I'm passionate about cybersecurity. And I am an author, and I publish epic fantasy books that, except for that one series idea I mentioned, have very little to do with technology. So I do both.
Yeah, and it's great that you've got two paths that you're passionate about as well. And you said you've written a book on cybersecurity as well. I imagine that was quite different to writing a fantasy novel.
It was a major challenge of imposter syndrome and trying to convince myself that I actually knew what I was talking about. I had a co-author for half the work. So she wrote half, I wrote half. But even with her support, it was definitely an experience of persuading myself that I could in fact do this. And then, just trad publishing is a completely different world.
Obviously, it's obviously non-fiction, so it will be different anyway, but was it a vastly different experience to the self-publishing experience you've had with your series?
Yeah, because the idea of having to deliver chapters on a deadline to anyone else. It was also that the editing process looked quite different. Multiple rounds where some things that you have to conform to their style for the series in which my particular book was published. Basically, it was like a multi-author certification guide series. So I had to conform to their style. There was, it's not like I designed my own cover. I just helped pick it. So there was quite a bit there. I wouldn't deny it's definitely a rewarding experience. Definitely good for the resume. It brought me closer to my co-author and made us better friends than I could have hoped for. But it was also a real struggle. It was, one of those crucibles as a writer.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of stress and pressure, basically.
Yeah. It's made me more confident in cybersecurity, and I think cleared up the last doubts I had as to whether I really belong in the space. But it's a reward worth the struggle it took to get here.
Yeah, so it's giving you a big positive outcome, but a big boost in your confidence. So, obviously, outside of cybersecurity, what do you do when you're not writing?
It's a kind of a strange question for me to answer because I read and I write so much. So I would say the first thing I do is I read a lot. I think between the new books and rereads, I think I've already read like 50 books this year. I read heaps. Other than that, like I watch TV. I like crime dramas. It's weird to say because I like only a specific kind of crime drama. The main show I watch is NCIS and the related shows. Popular series among certain people in the United States. Then other than that, there is my faith life. So I'm pretty involved in that. And then when the free time is around and I'm not doing all of the other things, then I bake. So still very, very much a novice baker, but I am kind of in the space now that I'm trying to create my own muffins, my own treats, my own snacks. So I make a really good pecan pie. And then if it's not that and all of the other things, then I've been also trying to slowly teach myself to digitally paint.
That sounds fun. Yeah, I know what you mean when you say about doing writing and reading so much, because as a writer, when you work as well, you tend to be trying to find that time to write. Isn't it? Whenever you have free time, it's like, okay, let's get some pages done.
It's one of those things, like it's like having a 1.75 worth of jobs. So it's the 40 hours for work, and then it's like trying to put as much time as you can towards writing. I mean, everything else, and then the time that you take out from that, as you know, Lucy, that's the time that you're forcing yourself to take a mental break, um, or like, when you just have to read a new book or something like that. So it's that little bit of time that I try to devote to other kinds of art. Baking is an art. Painting is
Yeah.
obviously an art. So
Mm-hmm.
try to explore those other passions that I have, the kind of hobbies that maybe I didn't really get to do when I was little, but now I definitely have the chance to do.
Yeah. And taking that mental break is so important when you're a writer, because if you try and push yourself too much, it just leads to burnout or writer's block, and then of course you can't write anything for however long it takes to recover from that. So it's so important to have things outside of writing.
It's also a really good way for me to clean my mind up, kind of reset before switching perspectives.
Yeah, I do a similar thing of, like, if you just feel stuck, for example, you take some time away from it, and it resets your brain. And I don't know about you, but I then find that ideas are popping into my head when I'm like doing stuff like driving or getting in the shower or whatever, and it's just, this is not the time, brain. Like,
Driving is my big book discussing block of time. In Texas, we have really long distances to drive. So sometimes even going to a store that has more of what we need might be half an
mhm.
hour or an hour, or even sometimes, like, depending on what it is that's we're going for, depending on traffic, like 2 hours. So thinking about writing, talking about it with whoever my passenger is, it's what keeps me awake. So it's a definite benefit.
Yeah, yeah, always good to keep you away while driving. Yeah.
Oh, obviously.
So what tips or advice would you give to someone who's starting out on their writing journey, perhaps looking at self-publishing as an option?
I have usually like two or three tips I try to give. Um, definitely the first one is to find the routine that works for you. Some people don't have a routine, some really, really do. It's important to write in a way that suits you. So, in terms of, like, do you write 500 words a day every day? Do you write 1,000 words a day? Do you not do any of that? There's a lot of advice out there, and the way that I've managed to make it work for me is I only found what was comfortable and I stuck with that. The second thing is that this is why I say that indie publishing is so great. It's important to stick to your own voice. There's a lot of advice out there about not including that trope or not including that plot element or not writing in a specific way. It's definitely against even indie convention for me to write five perspectives in a 600 to 700 page book. Even many indie authors would raise their eyebrows at that. But a story needs to be told in the way that it needs to be told and at the length that it needs to be told. So after, the practicals, okay, so do you know which genre you're writing in? Do you know what ways you're bending convention? You need to write the story that comes to you. And for some people, that is a combination of, like, science, like fantasy that is set in space, things like that, or which is, very, very convention defying. Or it
Mm-hmm.
can be a world with, like, a very complex system of mythology and theology. It can be a world where there are no gender norms. A story that doesn't have, the integrity of your own voice is a story that you won't be able to continue writing, and it's a story that people won't read. And the final thing I would say for someone entering indie publishing is that it's a space that you kind of have to play the long game for. You can't think that you could publish a single book and immediately gain popularity and immediately be able to make a living. Depending on how quickly you reach your readers and what subgenre you're writing, it can be years that you're still considered a small author. So this year will definitely make 4 years for me as an indie author, as a published author, and I am still a small author. I just have a small reader base. I don't make that much money, and there is nothing wrong with that. it's your journey, and sometimes some people the journey is much longer to success, and it takes years to get there. And the important thing is to think of the long term. Instead of thinking, how is it going to feel in a year or 5 years, think 10 years, 20 years. Because once you start and you do it well and you feel true to yourself, you could really just keep going. There are authors I know who've been publishing for 15 years. So it's both prudent and satisfying to be able to think of yourself going for many, many years rather than just thinking of the one book and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It takes time to build up a back catalogue, especially if you're writing a series, for example. It takes time to write that. And there's, the idea of being an overnight success. Of course, it happens, but it's so rare that that's not the reason you should be publishing a book, to become an overnight success. Staying true to what you want to write and what you enjoy writing is going to give you that long-term sustainability.
And I would say the advantage to a long game is that when you need to take a break, it doesn't feel like you're putting your pens away and you're never going to write again. And if a book takes longer than you're expecting, it's also, okay, I'm in this for the long run. It doesn't feel like you've completely lost your passion for writing. You have that mindset that steadies you, that this is just a bump on the journey.
Yeah. You'll always go back to it, but sometimes you might have to take a step away from it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're on to the quick fire round. So one answer, no explanation. Favourite book?
Aragon.
A favourite game?
Sorry. I don't know if other people know that.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Favourite film?
The Lord of the Rings.
And favourite writing beverage?
It's actually water. Most people answer coffee, but I am deathly afraid of liquid falling onto my equipment. And I also am deathly afraid of ants because of spilled drops of food and drink in the room. So
fair enough.
Water. At least it dries.
Yeah, totally understandable. Okay, Amena, so we're at the end for today. So to wrap up then, can you tell us where we can stay in touch with you, keep updated with your ongoing series?
So you can go to my website, amenajamali.com. It's just basically my first and last name. Similarly, I'm very active on Instagram, or usually very active. I've been kind of, due to various reasons, not been as active recently, but I'm normally pretty active. amenajamali.author is the handle. And then you can always email me at archivist@amenajamali.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really interesting talking to you, and I look forward to seeing the next books in your series. And is it weird to say seeing the covers come together as well?
It's definitely just about as satisfying as the book itself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy. Really appreciate it.